The late afternoon sun bled through the thin clouds above Fort Hanson, tinting the concrete training ground with a pale gold hue. Soldiers in neat formation shouted in rhythm, rifles gleaming, boots striking the ground like synchronized thunder. Amid that disciplined chaos, an old man in a faded army cap slowly walked toward the registration booth. His steps were steady but deliberate, as if each movement carried the weight of decades. Sergeant Miller, a young man barely 30, looked up from his clipboard and frowned. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his tone half polite, half curious. The old man's uniform jacket was wrinkled, the badges dull with time, and his left hand trembled slightly as he rested it on the counter. "I'd like to request permission to use the firing range," the veteran said quietly. His voice had that gravelly tone, not from weakness, but from long years of shouting commands and swallowing dust in places the young sergeant had only read about. Miller blinked. "Sir, the range is for active personnel only." "Are you retired?" "Retired?" The old man gave a small, humorless chuckle. "You could say that. Served 30 years, 2 wars. Name's Colonel Walter Briggs." The name sparked faint recognition, but Miller couldn't place it. Before he could respond, a louder voice cut through the air. "What's the holdup, Miller?" A tall man in pristine uniform strode over, Colonel Harris, known for his sharp tongue and sharper ego. When he saw the old man, a smirk played at his lips. "Well, this is new. Grandpa wants to play soldier again?" Several soldiers nearby chuckled. Walter didn't flinch. He simply looked at Harris with the kind of calm that came from surviving too many battles to be rattled by words. "I came to make a request," he said, his voice steady. "One last round. Just a few shots at the range." Harris crossed his arms. "We're not running a nostalgia camp, old man. You've had your time. Go home." A flicker of disappointment crossed Walter's eyes, not anger, just a quiet sadness. He nodded once, as if he had expected that answer. Then he turned to leave, but as he did, a nearby private whispered something to his friend. "I heard that name, Briggs. Wasn't he the one who led the Falcon Ridge operation? Saved an entire unit?" The murmurs spread quickly. Harris's smirk faltered. "Wait," he said, his tone less certain. "You're that Colonel Briggs?" Walter stopped, slowly turned back, and met his eyes. "I was," he said. "Once." For a moment, silence fell across the courtyard. Even the young recruits stopped what they were doing, watching the exchange. Harris cleared his throat. "Still doesn't change the rules," he said, though softer now. "Why do you even want to shoot again?" Walter's gaze drifted toward the distant firing range, the same dusty field where he had trained hundreds of men decades ago. "Because I need to remember what it felt like. Before I forget completely." Something in his voice made Harris hesitate. The arrogance melted for a second, replaced by a flicker of unease. Then he shrugged and walked off, muttering, "Do what you want. Just don't hurt yourself." Miller watched as the old veteran stood there in silence, staring at the targets far away, the wind tugging gently at his cap. He didn't look broken. He looked like a man standing between two worlds, one of glory long gone, and one that no longer needed him. The sound of gunfire echoed faintly across the dusty training grounds as Walter Briggs stood before the firing range gate. The wooden frame creaked in the breeze, its paint chipped by decades of sun and bullets. Behind him, a few curious soldiers had followed, some out of respect, most out of disbelief that a 70-year-old man had actually been granted access. Sergeant Miller stood beside him, clipboard forgotten. "Sir, are you sure you want to do this? Those rifles kick pretty hard." Walter smiled faintly. "Son, I've felt worse kicks from men in from life." He stepped forward, the gravel crunching under his worn boots. Each step seemed to echo memories buried under years of silence. He reached the weapon rack, where a young private hesitated before handing him a standard M4 carbine. Walter took it with both hands, feeling the familiar weight. His fingers, though aged, traced the contours of the gun as if greeting an old friend. The onlookers exchanged whispers. "He can barely hold it steady," one muttered. But when Walter raised the rifle, his movements changed. The tremor in his hand disappeared, replaced by a stillness so complete it drew silence from the crowd. His eyes sharpened, narrowing on the distant target. "Target's ready." Someone called out. Walter didn't respond. He adjusted his stance, right foot slightly back, left hand firm beneath the barrel. The wind tugged at his jacket. Then, with a slow exhale, he squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the air. The target's center erupted with a perfect hit. The soldiers blinked, stunned. Walter adjusted his aim, fired again, another bullseye. The rhythm was calm, almost meditative. Each shot landed closer to perfection, the recoil absorbed with effortless precision. After the fifth round, the range officer lowered his binoculars and muttered, "Everyone's at dead center." Colonel Harris arrived, his confident stride slowing as he took in the scene. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. Walter lowered his rifle, smoke curling from the barrel. His expression was unreadable, not pride, not triumph, just a quiet peace. "I taught myself to shoot," he said softly, "when the noise in my head got too loud. Out here, the noise stops." The soldiers exchanged glances. The laughter that once filled the air was gone, replaced by something else, respect. Harris stepped forward, his voice low. "That was impressive, Colonel, truly." Walter gave a small nod. "It's not about the gun," he replied. "It's about remembering who you were before the world moved on without you." The sun began to sink behind the barracks, painting the range in amber light. Walter placed the rifle gently back on the rack and walked past the stunned faces without another word. The echo of his footsteps lingered long after he was gone, just like the legend of the man who never missed. Night descended over Fort Hanson like a heavy curtain. The once bustling courtyard was quiet now, the rhythmic clatter of boots replaced by the distant hum of crickets and the low whisper of wind. Yet in the base office, light still flickered through the blinds. Sergeant Miller sat at his desk, unable to sleep. The memory of the old man's flawless shooting looped in his mind like a film he couldn't stop replaying. He opened his computer and typed, "Colonel Walter Briggs, service record." The database loaded slowly, humming with decades of classified data. Miller scrolled past the basic information. Enlisted 1971, retired 2001. Served in 2 wars, then paused at a line marked with a red tag, Operation Silent Falcon, classified. His curiosity deepened. He clicked. The screen filled with grainy black and white photos, mountain soldiers, helicopters lost in fog. And there he was, a much younger Walter Briggs, standing beside a burning convoy, rifle in hand, face streaked with dirt and determination. The caption beneath read, "Mission Leader, Briggs. Walter, Objective, Rescue and Extraction. Result, Success minus 27 survivors." Miller leaned back in awe. "He saved 27 men." He whispered. The door opened behind him. Colonel Harris stepped in, his tone sharp. "You're still here?" Miller jumped to attention. "Sir, I was reviewing an old service file." He hesitated, then turned the screen toward Harris. For a moment, the colonel said nothing. The flickering light of the monitor reflected in his eyes as he read line after line of declassified notes. His arrogance from earlier began to fade. "I remember this mission," he muttered. "They called it suicide. Everyone thought the team was wiped out. But someone brought them home." Miller nodded. That someone was him. Silence hung between them. Finally, Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. "We laughed at a legend today." The next morning, as dawn broke over the base, a quiet ripple of respect spread among the soldiers. News of the old colonel's past had made its way through every hallway and barrack. Some spoke in hushed reverence, others with disbelief, but all agreed on one thing. The man they had mocked deserved their salute. When Walter appeared again, walking slowly toward the mess hall, every conversation stopped. Soldiers stood at attention. One by one, they raised their hands in salute. Walter paused, visibly startled. His tired eyes softened as he looked around, at faces too young to remember the wars he had fought, yet old enough to understand what they meant. He gave a single nod of acknowledgement, humble but firm. Colonel Harris approached him, posture straight, voice steady. "Sir, we owe you an apology." Walter smiled faintly. "No, son. You owe me nothing. Just promise me one thing. When your time comes, you'll honor the uniform, not the man wearing it." The colonel swallowed, then extended his hand. Walter shook it, the firm, calloused handshake of two soldiers who finally understood each other. Outside, the morning sun painted the base in gold. For the first time in decades, the old veteran felt something he hadn't felt in years, not pride. Not nostalgia, but belonging. The storm had passed, but tension hung over Fort Maxwell like a lingering fog. Every conversation in the corridor seemed shorter. Every salute felt heavier. Colonel Davis sat alone in the command room, eyes locked on the encrypted message flashing on his screen. The Pentagon had officially issued a new directive, Operation Reclamation Locate and Retrieve. Subject, Samuel Cole. Status, prior asset. Approach, discreet. He read it twice, jaw tightening. Retrieve, not interview. That word told him everything. They weren't interested in talking. They wanted control or elimination. Agent Harper entered without knocking. "You've seen the directive," she said. "Yeah, and I don't like the sound of it." "It's not about what we like, Colonel. It's about what he knows." Davis turned toward her. "He's a veteran, not a threat." Her stare didn't waver. "If you believe that, you don't understand what he was trained for." She placed a tablet on the table. A series of surveillance photos appeared. Samuel at the diner, at a gas station, then walking into the woods beyond the town's edge. "He's staying off-grid," Harper said. "No electronic footprint, no calls, no credit traces. The kind of behavior only someone professionally trained for deep cover would know." Davis studied the photos. The man in them looked old, tired, but something about his posture still radiated authority. "You ever meet someone who's seen too much to die peacefully?" He muttered. Harper raised an eyebrow. "You sound like you respect him." "I do," Davis replied. "Maybe more than I should." Meanwhile, in a cabin deep within the pines, Samuel Cole set down his old duffel bag. Dust particles danced in the thin sunlight slicing through the blinds. He unzipped the bag. Inside, carefully wrapped in cloth, were fragments of a life erased, an insignia patch, faded dog tags, and a small photograph of a younger man standing with a teen whose faces were scratched out. He whispered to himself, "They still think they own me." A sound outside made him pause, the crunch of boots on gravel. Instinct kicked in. He extinguished the oil lamp, cocked his weapon, and moved silently to the window. Through the slits, he saw them, two men in dark suits scanning the area, rifles slung low but ready. Samuel's pulse didn't rise. It hadn't in years. He waited until one of them approached the porch, then stepped out of the shadows. "Don't," Samuel said quietly. The agent froze, turning slowly. "Mr. Cole, please. Tell Harper she's late," Samuel interrupted, and with that, he disappeared into the tree line, silent as smoke at the base. Harper's phone buzzed. A text appeared on her secure line. He made contact. "He's playing a game." Davis looked at her. "So what now?" Harper exhaled, rubbing her temple. "Now we follow his rules until we learn what he's really after." Davis frowned. "And if what he's after isn't us?" Harper glanced at him, eyes dark. "Then God help whoever it is." That night, Across the forest, a single cabin window flickered to life again. Inside, Samuel sat before an old radio transmitter, tuning through static until a faint encrypted signal cracked through. A voice distorted by time and distance. Phantom. This is Echo 1. Mission parameters unchanged. They reopened Epitaph. You know what that means. Samuel leaned forward, expression turning to stone. I know, he said quietly. It means the dead don't rest anymore. The morning fog still clung to the forest floor like a ghost reluctant to fade. Samuel Cole stood at the edge of a ridge, watching the rising sun spill its golden light over the valley below. His coat, still damp from the night's rain, hung heavy on his shoulders. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. But peace never lasted long in his world, not when secrets were buried beneath every breath. A car engine broke the silence. Tires crunched over gravel, slow and deliberate. Samuel didn't flinch. He already knew who it was. That Agent Harper stepped out of the black SUV, hands visible, no weapon drawn. Her expression was composed, but the weight behind her eyes told a different story. She wasn't here just to question him. Morning. Agent, Samuel said, voice low, gravelly. You don't make this easy, Harper replied. Approaching cautiously. Wasn't supposed to be easy, he said. You people don't come to talk to ghosts. Maybe I'm here to listen, she said softly. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded toward a fallen log nearby. Then sit. But I'll warn you, ghosts don't tell happy stories. They sat across from each other. The wind carried the smell of wet pine and distant smoke. Harper placed a recorder on her lap, though they both knew no official report would ever surface. Operation Epitaph, she began. What was it? Samuel's gaze drifted toward the horizon. It started as a recovery program. Vietnam, 69. We were sent to extract prisoners no one admitted existed. Then it changed, turned darker. They started experimenting, training men to disappear, to erase entire identities. We became weapons that didn't have names. And you were one of them, Harper said quietly. He nodded. Operator 01, the first to go dark. She hesitated, then asked, why fake your death? Samuel's voice hardened. Because they wanted to use me again. They called it resurrection, bringing the dead back into service. Men who'd already paid their dues. They promised it was for the country. But it was for control. For the first time, Harper's mask cracked. You mean reactivating soldiers without consent? Not soldiers, he corrected. Property. When you sign your life away to the flag, they think it means forever. A silence stretched between them. The forest whispered with the hum of insects, but neither spoke. Finally, Harper sighed. Then why come back now? Why show yourself? Samuel looked down at the dog tags around his neck, the same ones marked deceased. Because someone reopened the project, he said. Someone in your agency is trying to finish what we stopped. I came back to make sure it ends for good. Her voice trembled slightly. If what you're saying is true, the people involved won't hesitate to erase us both, he finished. They already sent 2 men after me last night. You think that was standard protocol? Harper swallowed hard. So what do we do? Samuel gave her a faint, grim smile. You're not ready for what comes next, Agent, but you're already part of it. He stood up, pulling his coat tight against the cold. You tell your colonel to stop following orders. The ones you're getting aren't from Washington anymore. As he walked away, Harper called out, Then who are they from? Samuel stopped, half turning. The people who built ghosts, he said, and disappeared back into the fog. Hours later, Harper returned to the base, her mind a storm. She found Colonel Davis waiting outside the operations building, expression tense. You found him? He asked. Yes, she said quietly. And I think we're on the wrong side of this. Before Davis could respond, alarms blared across the compound. A secure channel opened automatically on his computer inside. A voice cold and mechanical echoing through the speakers. Subject co-located. Termination authorized. Harper's face went pale. Davis turned toward her slowly. "They're not just after him," he said. "They're after anyone who knows." Outside, thunder rumbled again, as if the storm had only been waiting for the truth to surface. Colonel Briggs stood at the edge of the firing range, his arms crossed and a skeptical frown creasing his forehead. The sun was sinking low behind the Nevada desert hills, casting long golden shadows across the dusty training field. The old veteran Sergeant David Kane stood a few meters away, his gray hair stirring in the wind. His calloused hand steady on the M24 sniper rifle the young recruits had mockingly handed him. The men around the colonel watched in half amusement, half curiosity. The colonel's voice cut through the desert air. "All right, old man," he said, his tone mocking but not cruel. "You wanted a fair shot. Let's see what you've got. Target's at 800 meters. David said nothing. He simply nodded, his face calm and expressionless. He adjusted the rifle, the weight of it feeling both foreign and familiar in his hands. The air smelled of dust and burnt brass. Memories of his younger days flashed through his mind. Jungle ambushes, night patrols, men he'd led who never came home. A nearby recruit snickered. "Bet he can't even see the damn target." But when David lowered himself to the ground, his movements were sharp measured. The chatter died down. He lay prone, his cheek resting against the cold steel of the stock. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat synced with the rhythm of the desert wind. Colonel Briggs glanced at his watch impatiently, but then his expression shifted as he noticed something in the old man's posture. There was discipline there, a precision he hadn't seen in decades. The veteran inhaled deeply, squeezed the trigger halfway, and exhaled. The rifle cracked sharp, clean, echoing across the barren range. Ding. A faint metallic sound echoed back. Bullseye. The laughter died instantly. The young recruit stared at the distant target, then at the old man who had already chambered another round. 800 meters confirmed hit. The range officer muttered in disbelief. David didn't even look up. "Next target," he said quietly. Colonel Briggs nodded, motioning toward the control tower. The next steel plate rose, this time at 1,000 meters. The wind had picked up now, twisting dust devils across the field. David adjusted the scope, calculating in his mind the drop, the windage, the humidity. He fired again. Ding. A clean hit center mass. The colonel's jaw tensed. There was something electric in the air now, a mix of awe and shame. The recruits who had mocked David earlier were now silent, their eyes wide. The old man's calm precision felt like poetry, years of experience, honed into instinct. By the time the final target, a 2,000-meter plate, was raised, the sun had vanished. Only the red afterglow and the desert wind remained. David lay still, breathing slow and deep, feeling every ounce of gravity, every whisper of the air. Then one final shot. The echo stretched long, fading into silence after what felt like an eternity. Ding. A perfect hit. Colonel Briggs exhaled slowly. The sound of his boots crunching on gravel was the only noise as he walked toward David. "Where did you serve?" the colonel finally asked, his voice stripped of arrogance. David didn't answer at first. He lifted his gaze, his eyes calm but haunted. "Classified," he said quietly. "But let's just say, I used to teach the ones who taught you." Briggs froze. He had heard rumors of elite Black Ops units men who had operated off the books, whose names didn't exist on any record. For the first time, he realized he might be standing before one of them. The colonel extended his hand, his expression solemn. "You've still got it, Sergeant." David stood, his joints stiff but his posture still proud. He didn't take the hand immediately. He just said, It was never about proving anything, Colonel. It was about remembering what we fought for. The two men locked eyes. For a long moment, there was silence and unspoken understanding between soldiers of different generations. As the wind carried the sound of distant echoes across the empty range, the young recruits finally broke into respectful applause. Not for a legend, not for a myth, but for a man who had carried the weight of his country and still stood unshaken. Night had fallen over the Nevada base, bringing with it a cold silence that seemed to hang in the air like dust after a battle. The desert stars glittered faintly above the floodlights of the training compound. Most of the recruits had already gone back to their quarters, still whispering in awe about the old man who had hit a 2,000-meter target, like it was nothing. But inside the command center, Colonel Briggs couldn't sleep. He sat alone in his office, replaying the day's events in his head. The old man's calm precision, his quiet words, "I used to teach the ones who taught you." That sentence haunted him. He opened his laptop and typed into the internal personnel system, "David Kane, retired Sergeant Major." The system hesitated. Then, instead of showing a normal profile, a red box appeared across the screen. "Access restricted, classified level 7, top secret clearance required." Briggs frowned. Level 7 was above his clearance. Only Pentagon intelligence officers or Black Ops directors had access to that level. He leaned back, rubbing his chin, curiosity battling protocol. "Who the hell are you, old man?" he muttered. Moments later, the command center lights flickered. The base network had triggered a silent security flag. Within seconds, somewhere deep in the military's data infrastructure, an automated system had pinned a long-dormant record, Project Sentinel, miles away in Washington, D.C. A red icon lit up on a Pentagon monitor. A duty officer squinted at the flashing alert. "Sir," he called out, "a restricted file just got pinned, something called Sentinel Protocol." The flag came from a training base in Nevada. The senior analyst walked over, reading the line of code that had been triggered. He froze. "That's impossible," he said quietly. "That project was terminated 30 years ago." Back at the base, Colonel Briggs was still staring at his screen when the phone rang. "Colonel Briggs," he answered. A cold, authoritative voice responded. "This is Major General Harlan. Did you access a restricted personnel file under the name David Kane?" Briggs hesitated. "Yes, sir. The individual participated in a firing test earlier today. Exceptional skill set, but—" "Shut it down, Colonel," the voice interrupted sharply. "Lock down all data from that terminal and escort the subject to isolation." "That's an order." Briggs straightened in his chair. "With respect, sir, the man's a veteran. He's harmless." "Not your call," Harlan said, his tone ice. "Do not engage further. He is not to leave the base." The line went dead. Meanwhile, David Kane was in the barracks, cleaning the rifle the recruits had lent him. Every motion was methodical, like a ritual. The click of the bolt, the slide of the rod, the smell of gun oil, it all took him back to the days when the world was divided by shadows. And men like him existed in them. He felt the eyes on him before he heard the boots. 2 MPs entered the room, their expressions uneasy. "Sir," one said, "we've been ordered to escort you to Colonel Briggs' office." David didn't argue. He just nodded and followed them into the cold corridor. When he entered the colonel's office, Briggs was standing behind his desk, tension in his posture. "Mind telling me what's going on?" David asked calmly. Briggs exhaled. "I tried to look up your record. The system triggered a top-secret alert." For the first time, the old man's eyes flickered with something: pain, maybe regret. "You shouldn't have done that, Colonel." Briggs frowned. "Why? Who are you?" David's gaze shifted to the window, where floodlights illuminated the barren field outside. "Once upon a time they called us ghosts," he said quietly. "Men who didn't exist. We were sent where wars never officially happened. The colonel's mouth went dry. You mean black operations? David gave a small nod. Something like that. I was part of a program they shut down decades ago, at least that's what they claimed. Before Briggs could respond, the phone on his desk rang again. He answered, "This is Briggs." A digital voice replied this time, flat and mechanical. Security breach confirmed. Subject Kane is classified under Project Sentinel. Immediate retrieval authorized. Briggs's blood ran cold. Retrieval? He repeated. The line cut off. Outside, alarms began to wail. Red lights flooded the hallway. The two MPs instinctively reached for their weapons. What's happening? One shouted. David stood still, calm amid the chaos. He closed his eyes for a moment and whispered, "They found me." Colonel Briggs looked at him sharply. "Who's they?" David looked up, and his voice carried a cold, tired certainty. "The same people who built me." Within minutes, black SUVs rolled through the base gates. Men in unmarked tactical gear stepped out, no insignias, no names. They moved with chilling precision. One of them approached the colonel and flashed a black identification badge with a red triangle emblem. Special Operations Division. "We're here for Sergeant Major Kane." Briggs clenched his jaw. Under whose authority? The man didn't answer. He just said, "Yours isn't high enough, Colonel." David turned toward Briggs and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't fight them. You won't win this one." The colonel's eyes burned with defiance. "You don't deserve this. You served your country." David gave a faint, sorrowful smile. "I served the shadows, Colonel. And the shadows never let go." As the operatives surrounded him, David raised his hands slowly. His posture was dignified, not a surrender, but an acceptance. The air outside was thick with the low hum of helicopter rotors approaching. "Where are you taking him?" Briggs demanded. No one answered. The operatives led the old man out into the night, floodlights washing over his silver hair. For a moment, their eyes met soldier to soldier. And then David was gone. The colonel stood alone under the flickering red light. The distant sound of rotors fading into the black desert sky. Somewhere deep in the Pentagon. A screen went dark again. Project Sentinel reactivated. The black SUVs disappeared into the desert night, their headlights swallowed by dust and distance. Colonel Briggs stood at the gate long after they were gone, the echo of helicopter blades still ringing in his ears. The night air felt heavier now, filled with questions that no one would answer. By morning, the base had gone silent. The soldiers whispered about what had happened, that the old man wasn't just some retired veteran, but someone from a part of the army no one talked about. Briggs had already received an official memo from Washington. It was short, cold, and final. Sergeant Major David Kane, temporary detainment for debriefing. Case sealed under National Security Directive 10-77. The colonel read the line over and over again. It didn't say where Kane was taken or why. It didn't even acknowledge what he'd done. Just another name filed away into the shadows, hundreds of miles away. In an underground facility with no windows or signs, David Kane sat in a sterile room. The walls were gray steel, humming faintly with hidden electronics. Two men in black suits entered. Neither introduced themselves. One of them placed a thick red folder on the table. "Its cover read, Project Sentinel, Mr. Kane," the first man said calmly. "You were never officially discharged from service." David smiled faintly, his voice steady. "After 30 years, you finally remembered me?" The man ignored the jab. "We ran your performance metrics at the range. Your data matched archived biometric patterns from the Sentinel program. There's no denying who you are." "I never denied it," David replied. "You're the ones who tried to erase me." The second agent leaned forward. Sentinel wasn't just about training assassins. It was about creating autonomous operatives, soldiers who could act beyond command structure, think, decide, and disappear. David's eyes narrowed. And when we started thinking too much, you shut it down. The man's tone hardened. You were supposed to die in the Balkan operation, 1995. We closed the file for a reason. David leaned back, staring at the ceiling light above him. Guess death didn't take that day. Silence. Only the low hum of machines filled the room. Then the agent slid a tablet across the table. On it, a photo appeared, a recent satellite image of a compound in Eastern Europe. You recognize this? David's expression froze. That's impossible. That site was destroyed. Apparently not, the man said. Someone rebuilt it. Someone who still believes Sentinel should live on. The room felt colder now. So that's why you dragged me back, David said quietly. You want me to finish the job you started. The agent gave a thin smile. Not exactly. We want you to lead it again. David's hands tightened into fists. Decades of buried anger rippled through his calm exterior. After everything we did? After what it cost? You don't have a choice, the first man said flatly. You're property of the United States government. You always were. That sentence hit harder than a bullet. Property. After all the years, all the blood, all the ghosts. That's what they still saw him as. David stood slowly. His reflection shimmered in the mirrored wall, older, worn, but still unbroken. You made a mistake bringing me back, he said softly. Because this time, I remember everything. Meanwhile, at the Nevada base, Colonel Briggs received one last encrypted message. It wasn't from the Pentagon. It came from an untraceable source. The text was short and chillingly direct. Tell them Project Sentinel is awake. Briggs stared at the screen, his hand trembling slightly. Then the message vanished. No sender. No trace. Outside, dawn broke over the desert, painting the sand in gold and red. The base's flag flapped in the morning wind, calm proud. Unaware of the storm it had just unleashed. And somewhere, far below the earth, a door hissed open. David Kane stepped through it in a new black uniform. No insignia, no rank. Only the faint red triangle stitched at the collar. The shadows had reclaimed their ghost.